Okay, so we're going to read the rest of chapter 7, starting on the page of 217. Despite everything, Mikey laughed, and then I noticed he'd been shot during the fall. There was blood pumping out of his stomach. But just then, there was a thunderous explosion from one of the grenades, too close, much too close. We both wheeled around in the swirling dust and smoke, and there behind us were two large logs, actually felled trees. They were crossed over at the ends like a pair of giant chopsticks, facing up the mountains, and we turned simultaneously and sprinted for cover. We cleared the logs and crashed down behind them, safe for the gunfire attack for the moment. We were still both armed and ready to fight. I took the right-hand side, Mikey center, and guarding both the head-on approach and the flank. We could see them plainly now, swarming down the flanks of the cliff we had just crashed down. They were moving very fast, though not nearly as fast as we had. Mikey had a pretty good line on them, and mine wasn't bad. We opened fire at them, picking them off one by one as they moved in on us. Trouble was, there were so many, and it didn't seem to matter how many we killed, they just kept coming. I remember thinking that was 200 estimate was a lot closer than the 80 minimum we had been advised. And this must have been Shamrock's work, because these guys were not really marksmen. Were using marginal rifles pretty recklessly, but nonetheless followed the military rules for this type of assault. They advanced down the side of the battlefield, trying to outflank their enemy, always attempting to get a 360-degree cover on their target. We were surely slowing their progress down, but we weren't stopping them. The fire never slackened for 5 minutes. They had sustained non-stop the opening volley, the one fired way back up the mountain when they did not see their target. They had blasted away at us all the way down to these logs, and they had augmented their fire with aimed rocket-propelled grenades. These guys were not being led by some mad-eyed mystic. These guys were not being led by some mad-eyed hysteric. They were being led by someone who understood the rudiments of what he was doing, understood them well, too well, the fucker. And now they had us pinned down behind the logs, and, as ever, the bullets were flying, but we were somehow getting the better of the exchanges. Mikey was ignoring his wound and fighting like a SEAL officer should, uncompromising, steady, hard-eyed, and professional. I could see the guys on the left flank dropping down their tracks as they raced towards us. On my side, over the right, the ground was just a little flatter with trees, and there did not seem to be so many of them. Every time they moved, I shot them. It was probably clear to them that Mikey and I could not be dislodged as long as their big logs covered us, and that's when they went to their biggest barrage of RPGs yet. These damned things, trailing the familiar white smoke, were unleashed at us from farther up the mountain. They landed to the front and to the side, but not behind. They caused a tidal wave of dirt, rocks, and smoke, showering us with the stuff, robbing us of our vision. Our heads went down, and I asked Mikey where the hell Axe and Danny, and of course neither of us knew. All we knew was they were up there on the mountain, not having jumped as we had. Guess Axe must have dug in and kept fighting out on the left, he said. Danny's got a better chance of a radio contact high up there than he would down here. We risked a look up through the gloom, and we saw a figure plummeting down the mountain just to the left of where we had fallen. Axe, no doubt, but could he survive the fall? He was on the first slope before the trees, and the second later he hurled it over the ski jump, flipped, and crashed down the almost sheer cliff face. The gradient saved him, as it had saved Mikey and me, the way the steep mountain saves a ski jumper, enabling him to continue down at a high speed without a terminal collision with the flat ground. Axe arrived in one piece, stunned and disorientated, but the Taliban could see him now, and they opened fire on him as he lay on the ground. "Run, Axe! Right here, buddy, run!" yelled Murph at the top of his lungs. And Axe recovered his senses real quick, bullets flying around him, and he cleared those logs and crashed into our hide, landing on his back. It's unbelievable what you can do when the threat to your own life is that bad. He took the far left, slammed a new magazine into the breech, and started fighting, never missed a beat, hammering away at our most vulnerable point of enemy attack. The three of us just kept shooting them down, hoping and praying their numbers would lessen, that we had punched a hole in their assault. But it sure as hell never seemed like it. These guys were still swarming, still firing, and the noise was still deafening. The question was, where was Danny? What was that little mountain lion still fighting, still trying to make contact as he pounded away at Shamrock's troops? Was he still trying to get through to HQ? None of us knew, but the answer was not long in arriving. From the high end to on the right of the main cliff face was suddenly unusual movement. Someone was following. It had to be Danny. The flailing body crashed through the high woods and flipped at the ski jump, tumbling and tumbling all the way to the bottom, where it landed with a sickening thump, just as we all had. But Danny never moved, just lay there, either stunned or dead, and the folklore of the Brotherhood stood starkly before Mikey and me. No SEAL was ever left alone to die on the battlefield. No SEAL. I dropped my rifle and cleared the log in one bound. Mikey came right after me. Axe kept firing, trying to give us cover. As we ducked down and ran fast across the flat ground to the base of the cliff, Mikey was still pouring blood from his stomach, and I felt like I had a broken back low down, base of my spine. We reached Danny together, hoisted him up, and manhandled him back to the logs, dragging him into what passed for safety around here. They fired at us from the heights all the way across the lethal ground, but no one got hit, and somehow, against truly staggering odds, we were still going, all in one piece, except for the shot Mikey took. As the resident medic, I should have been able to help, but all my stuff had been ripped away in the fall, and there was no time to do anything except shoot these bastards who carried AK-47s and hope to Christ they'd give up, or at least run out of those RPGs. They could hurt someone if they weren't careful, fuckers. Right then, I was confident we were going to make it. The ground fell away quite sharply behind us, but way below our target village, it was flat ground, with sturdy-looking houses. Cover, that was all we needed. With our enemy caught flat-footed on the ground, we'd be all right. We'd get him. Danny fought back, cleared his head, and tried to get up. But his face was rigid, he was in terrible pain, and then I saw blood pouring out of his hand. "I've been shot, Marcus. Can you help me?" he said. "We've all been shot," replied Mikey. "Can you fight?" I stared at Danny's right hand. His thumb had been blown right off. I saw him grit his teeth and nod, sweat streaming down his blackened face. He adjusted his rifle, banged a new magazine with the butt of his hand, and took his place in the center of our little gun line. Then he turned to face the enemy once more. He was a bull mastiff, glaring up the mountain, and opened fire with everything he had. Danny, Mikey, and Axe blasted the left flank, while I held the right. The fire was still fierce on all sides, and we sensed there would be more dead Afghans to the left than there were to the right. Murph shouted, "We're going for higher ground, this side." And with all four barrels blazing, we tried to storm the left flank, get a foothold on the steep slope, maybe even fight our way back up to the top if we could kill enough of them. But they also wanted higher ground, and they reinforced their right flank, driving down from the top, anything to stop us from getting the upper hand. We must have killed 50 or more of them, and all four of us were still fighting. I guess they'd probably noticed that, because they were prepared to fight to the last man to hold our left, their right. There were so many of them, we found ourselves slipping inexorably back down the hill as the turbaned warriors closed in on us, driving us back by sheer weight of numbers, sheer volume of fire. When they loosed off another battery of RPGs, we had no other option but to retreat and dive back behind the crossed logs before they blew our heads off. God only knows what the size of whatever arms cache they were drawing ordnance from, but we were finding out just what a force Sharmak and his guys really were. Trained, heavily armed, fearless, and strategically on the ball. Not quite what we expected when we first landed at Bagram. Back behind the logs we kept going, moving down them in the flanks whenever we could get a clear shot. But again, inflexible, unswerving progress of Sharmak's forces coming down the escarpment after us was simply too overwhelming. Not so much due to the volume of fire, but because of their irresistible drive down the left and right of our positions. The logs gave us good cover from the front, and not bad from 90 degrees. But once they got past that, firing from slightly behind us on both sides, well, that was the reason we jumped from the heights in the first place, risking our necks, not knowing when or even if we would land on reasonable ground. There were enough of us to protect our flanks. There were not enough of us to protect our flanks. We were too occupied defending our position against the head-on attack. I suppose the goat herds had told them there were only 4, and Sharmak swiftly guessed we would be vulnerable on the wings. I'm guessing a dozen SEALs could have held them and destroyed them, but that would have been odds of around 10 or 11 to 1. We were only 4, and that was probably 35 to 1, which is known in military vernacular as balls-to-the-wall situation, especially as we now seemed incapable of calling up cavalry from HQ. Right here was the 21st century version of General Custer's Last Stand, Little Bighorn with turbans. But they hadn't gotten us yet, and if I had my way, they were never going to. I know all 4 of us thought that exactly. all four of us thought exactly that. Our only option, however, was to get to flatter ground, and there wasn't any way of that up here. There was only one way for us to go, backward and down, straight down. Mike Murphy called it. They'll kill us if we stay here. Jump, guys, for fuck's sake, jump. And once more, all four of us clutched our rifles, stood up, braved the flying bullets, and headed for the precipice. We leaped into the void, Mikey first, me next, then Axe, and then Danny. The drop must have gone 30 or 40 feet down into the thickets of the shrubs alongside a little stream. We were by no means at the base of this little escarpment, but at least we were once more on a flat bed and not clinging to the same cliff face. I landed directly on top of Mikey, then Axe and Danny landed on both of us. There wasn't even time to let rip with a few curses. We spread out and took up firing positions again, preparing once more to blast the enemy away from our flanks, where they were sure to begin their advance in the next stage of this battle. They were clambering down the rocks to our right, and I was trying to make sure none of them made it to the bottom. My rifle felt red hot, and I just kept loading and shooting, aiming and firing, wishing to hell I still had my Texas helmet. We were trying to move into a decent position, jumping behind rocks, working our way into open ground, but we were picking up fire now. The Taliban had seen us, and we were raining bullets down, firing on our prime overhead spot. We moved back against the rocks, and Danny was shot again. They hit him in his lower back, and the bullet blew out of his stomach. He was still firing. Christ knows how, but he was. Danny's mouth was open, and there was blood trickling out. There was blood absolutely everywhere. It was hot. The stench of it was unmistakable. The cordite was heavy in the air, and the noise, which had not abated since they first opened fire, was deafening. Our ears were ringing from the blast like we were wearing headphones. And then they opened up with grenades again. We saw the white smoke streaking through the air. We saw them coming, winging down the canyon right onto us. And when they blew, the blast was overpowering, echoing from the granite rocks that surrounded us on three sides. It was like the world was blowing up around us, like the flying rock splinters, some of them pretty large, clattering off the cliff walls, ricocheting bullets, the swirling dust cloud enveloping the shrapnel and covering us, choking us, obscuring everything. Murph was trying to reassess the situation, desperately trying to make the right decision despite our limited options. And let's face it, the options had not changed very much since I first slammed a bullet between the guy's eyes from behind the tree. Right now, we were not hemmed into our flanks. Our enemy was dead ahead, that and straight up, overhead, and that's bad. I guess the oldest military strategy in the world is to gain the higher ground. In my experience, no Taliban commander had ever ordered his men to fight from anything from other than higher ground. And did they ever have it now? If we had been in a cornfield, it would have been nothing like so dangerous, because the bullets would have hit the earth and stayed there. But they were in a granite-walled corner, and everything bounced off about a zillion miles per hour, which was more or less the definition of ricochet. Everything, bullets, shrapnel, fragments, came zinging off those rocks. It seemed to us like the Taliban were getting double for every shot. If the bullet missed, watch the hell out for the ricochet. And how much longer we could go on taking this kind of bombardment without getting ourselves killed was anyone's guess. Murph and Danny had picked up the fight on the left and were still firing. Still hitting them pretty good. I was firing upward, trying to pick them off between the rocks, and Axe had jammed himself into a good spot in the rocks and was blazing away at the oncoming turbines.